Perfect.
Hi, good morning, and welcome to the NASA Human Research Program Pre-Proposal Conference. We're going to be here to discuss the 2019 Human Exploration Research Opportunities, known as HERO. We have Appendices A and B to discuss with you today. I am Jennifer Fogarty. I'm the Chief Scientist for the NASA Human Research Program, known as HRP. I have our support staff and our element scientists with us today to help answer any questions you have at the end. We're going to go to the first slide. As I stated, this is the pre-proposal conference, and it's really intended to clarify the solicitation and help improve the quality and responsiveness of your proposal so that you're better prepared and you understand, based on what we've written, what we really meant, and also based on what you specifically might like to propose, how open we are to various things about that. It really offers the opportunity for NASA to provide potential proposers information or emphasize existing information that we think will really benefit you. It also offers you, the proposers, the potential proposers, the opportunity to pose questions and receive answers, and also request some clarification. We do our best to be able to answer real time. However, there may be instances where we don't have the answer readily at hand, and we will provide that via the frequently asked questions page. So all of the content from today, which is an open conference call, this is publicly available. So anything you say will be recorded, and if it is part of the question answer, that will be documented in writing for everyone to see and understand. The presentations will be posted at the NSPIRE's website. We have the link here, and I believe the link will also be available as long as you get to NSPIRE's. You'll be able to get to that. We may, in addition to not being able to answer your question real time, have to kind of take a pause and engage in a sidebar depending on the complexity of what you are asking. And again, we may defer some questions so that we can go get you the best answer that may not be readily at our hands during the teleconference. Can we go to the next slide? So a little bit about the Human Research Program. We consider ourselves and act in an applied manner, meaning that our output, our deliverables, the things that come from the research we do, have to have mission applicability. So we perform research necessary to understand and reduce spaceflight human health performance risks for exploration, and we're going to go into some detail on what we recognize as risks and some opportunities to learn more about maybe risks we don't recognize. We really focus on enabling development of human spaceflight medical and human performance standards. So those things help set the stage in terms of the human component. That means maybe a tolerance level or an exposure level, and also things that maybe we would want to influence with a vehicle design to engineer something out. And we will discuss that a little bit more, the concept of engineering things out. We also develop and validate technologies that serve to characterize and reduce medical and performance risks associated with human spaceflight. So there is a technology development component, both for research purposes and then also transitioning it to the operational paradigm. So there are different levels of maturity, and we do address those various levels. Go to the next slide. So this graphic depicts the current agency position on exploration planned activities. As I'm sure you're all aware, the announcement of Moon 2024 of boots on the ground, there's a couple of things that are going to happen before then to enable it. Of course, we do our research on Earth itself. We can use low Earth orbit. The International Space Station is our premier orbiting laboratory, and in some combinations, that's what is available to us today to do research to mitigate these risks. Pretty soon we will have some capability on the lunar surface, and we do have the need to understand partial G exposures, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that in one of the topics today. The agency is moving forward with commercial landers before we're sending people back and improving the capability of functioning on the lunar surface and understanding both the opportunities and the challenge that may bring. The Orion spacecraft, which is our crewed vehicle, is planned to launch and have the capability of moving crew into lunar orbit in and around the early 2020s even before the objective of the 2024 boots on the ground. There is a development of what's called Gateway, which will be a lunar orbiting capability. Given the phasing and the focus on boots on the ground in 2024, it will be a very minimal capability in the lunar orbit. Most of the capability associated with Gateway will initially rely on Orion. And then there are plans in additional phases to grow the capability in lunar orbit for a more robust orbiting laboratory in later 2020s and 2030s in Gateway. The vision is to have both Gateway and then the lunar surface capability at some tempo. Our objectives are to use these platforms not only to inform those missions, which are part of exploration, but as a more Mars-forward platform. So, we'll go to the next slide. A little bit more about HRP and our characteristics, so you might understand how we kind of divide and conquer. We recognize that the human is going to experience space flight in its totality, meaning the human is going to experience microgravity, G-transition, space radiation, isolation and confinement. It'll be a closed environment, a closed-loop environment system. So there are a lot of different sources of exposures and stressors or hazards that we have to account for that will occur simultaneously, yet we may be only able to study combinations of that at a time. And the way we've parsed the risks that we will go in, again, more detail about, we have the elements, which are components of HRP, be lead in terms of addressing any one of the risks. So for this list, our 5 elements, the first one is exploration medical capability. We often describe that as the pointy end of the spear. That is the element responsible for developing the medical and really performance, so like a true health and performance system of the future. All of our research and what we know terrestrially about the condition of the human needs to inform what the medical and performance needs will be, and that also has to be in balance with what the mission requirements are. And the mission requirements can vary based on duration, where exactly the vehicles are going, what activities the crew will be doing, and how long they'll be in the different components of the mission. So when we often discuss the Mars scenario, how long will they be in transit in, say, microgravity and deep space radiation exposure and isolation and confinement with the com delay, and then when they reach Mars orbit, when they go to the surface, the detransition, the partial G exposure, how long on the surface, what kind of activities, and then, of course, returning to Mars orbit, and then the transit home. So in its totality, that being the most challenging mission that we have put in front of us right now, we have pieces of that both in low Earth orbit, and we will have pieces of that with the lunar operations. So exploration medical capability has to understand how to prepare for medical events and make a robust medical system, but also how to inform keeping the people performance ready. The next element, human factors and behavioral performance, focuses on various aspects of the human and vehicle or mission interface, but also the individual and interpersonal aspects, the psychological aspects of being on these missions for very long durations and very isolated conditions, and also the interaction between the two. There is also an integrative risk research plan within the human factors behavioral performance led by Dr. Tom Williams that focuses on the central nervous system, and from each of our risks that focuses on the central nervous system, the impact of space radiation, the impact of isolation, confinement, and closed environment with respect to behavioral medicine, or what's known as our BMED risk. And then in addition, the issue with the sensory motor, the neurovestibular issues, so the acronym becomes CBS, CNS, BMED, and sensory motor. The next element is human health countermeasures, which really focuses on the adaptive activities that occur in the human body during the different exposures, really heavily focused on physiology and everything that falls under that multi-system, multidisciplinary. So you can start to see there's a lot of crossover between elements. The next one is research, operations, and integration. That was formerly known, for those of you who interacted with HRP before, as the ISS Medical Projects Branch. They are an implementing arm. They recently went through the name change because they will be implementing both active science and validation of our science on more than just the ISS platform. So it was a name change was due. And of course, we have the space radiation element, who is focusing on the biological effects of radiation exposure and currently is using a ground-based analog and mainly animal models to address that, and we need a translational path. And this circles back, as I mentioned, with the integrated research plan, the concept of we really need to start looking at these risks with the multiple hazard exposures concurrently, to have a more confident and better risk prediction for what the potential outcomes may be during an exploration mission, as well as after, because we are also responsible for long-term health impacts of human spaceflight. In addition to HRP's elements, HRP funded a cooperative agreement to Baylor College of Medicine, who is working with Caltech and MIT for a translational research institute, and that is called the Translational Institute for Space Health. They run their own solicitations. They are charged with being much more disruptive with their solutions. Very novel, innovative things, high-risk things fit better into their portfolio. So at times, depending on your question, we have given guidance that it might be more appropriate for you to look at TRISH as the organization that might be a better funding opportunity. We also collaborate with NASA Space Biology to understand, say, the causal, cellular, or other mechanisms that underlie the adaptation to fractional gravity in cells, microorganisms, plants, animals. They also collaborate with us on the food and nutrition risk, because there are aspects clearly that we're interested of growing food during space flight and benefiting from the psychological benefits of interacting with growing food, but also the nutritional benefits of having real-time food grown. So that has been a work in progress and a collaboration with that group. And at times when someone may suggest or ask about something that's very mechanistic or fundamental, we may also point to space biology as a potential entity to fund work. So the next slide. So on slide 6, we have the depiction of the various venues where we do our research. Of course, there's the International Space Station. You get clearly the microgravity, you get small amounts of space radiation, you get the complexity of field research, the team dynamics of astronauts. So it is one of our more robust areas, but we actually do consider it an analog for exploration. It doesn't quite have all the same features that we know, and really about the constraints that we know will be present during exploration spaceflight. It is a relatively large habitable volume across the entire, what we call stack, the modules that are interconnected. The crew can have privacy. There's lots of different working spaces. They can, agree to join up, say, various points of the day in the galley to share a meal, but go off and have to concentrate on their work. In the future, the habitable volumes are proposed to be much more constrained than that. We also are trying to understand the roles, not only the team dynamics, but the effect of how does privacy or not play into those things. So when you see our calls and our topics, we often try to explain when a venue is appropriate and how we would be requesting that a topic be researched in a particular venue, which we'll get to on some of our topics. The other one is the NASA Space Radiation Lab, which is housed at Brookhaven National Laboratory. We are now capable of doing complex spectrum exposure, which we call DCR SIM. We have, in the areas under space radiation, you can find the information on the types of energies that are in the beam and how the beam switches exposures real time. It also technologically has been advanced to allow us to do doses as opposed to a bolus, a mission dose in a very short period of time. This allows, say, a daily exposure, so you get the cumulative dose that's mission relevant over a period of days. So in the past 2 years, we've realized a big step forward in the technological area. For our head-down bed rest and some of our environmental manipulations, we have used NVHAB, which is at the DLR facility in Cologne, Germany, with in conjunction with the DLR Institute. We'll continue to use that as our head-down bed rest facility, so if that isn't in a current topic, but in the future. And to the right is the Human Exploration Research Analog, which is a facility here at Johnson Space Center. That is one that we control and manage the operations of, and we can manipulate habitable volume, lighting, a variety of different conditions to make it more mission-like, and also have control over the mission scenario that adds to the fidelity of the analog, and that is focused on being an isolated, confined, and controlled venue. Go to the next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about our risk mitigation and where our proposals fit into that scheme. You'll see in a future slide, again, more detail about the actual risks and how we articulate them, and there's a very robust HRP web presence if you'd like to educate yourself more before asking questions or proposing. There's about 34 risks and concerns that we believe are relevant to exploration within our portfolio. And we really focus on the risks that could have substantial negative effects on the exploration mission. So oftentimes if there's an issue there that they think should be there, if you go in and you look at the evidence page, you'll find it nested under. We understand how there's many contributors, but we articulate these very high-level 34 risks and concerns. We break down the risks into gaps. We talk about the gaps with respect to knowledge, things we don't know. Maybe we understand the risk, but we can't mitigate it sufficiently, so we're looking for mitigation capabilities. But in terms of these proposals, we really want to identify the research products required to fill the gaps. So that's what you're going to see in the write-up. What area are we targeting with the topic with respect to the gap? And also, the research products that we're asking to be generated, are those deliverables? How does the output of a research project we want to fund meet the applied need? How is it going to inform the mission? And there's a continuum in terms of if it's knowledge that could help us inform things about mission architecture, vehicle design, and in some cases, it's how to mitigate the risk, so it leads down a technology trail. And oftentimes, our requests aren't for the end technology in its totality now, but a component of how we approach it. So it's very important to read the topic and try to really understand what deliverable we are trying to achieve. And then as we progress through the maturation, and I kind of mentioned this before with the Research Operations and Integration Group about validating research projects as needed, and those would be follow-on activities that we would determine if we need it or not. And we're continually in a state of reassessing our gaps. So as deliverables and products out of the research come in, how does that confirm, validate, or question where we've been in the past, and strategically how do we respond to that? There's several different areas where you could have forks in the road, and the research products really help us decide, are we on the right path, or do we have to make a change? Go to the next slide. So this slide is known as our integrated path to risk reduction. So you're going to see the 34 risks and concerns stratified in a way that we try to communicate a lot of different things simultaneously. The color system, I think, can be pretty intuitive and designed to be red, yellow, green. Is green being we think we are go for the exploration mission in terms of whatever is connected to the risk, where you might see the green line means we're in a posture that we accept. Yellow indicates there's some kind of caution and warning. There's something about it that still represents the risk. It may be acceptable, but transparently we understand what it is and we're willing to move forward with it or not. So we do investments in the yellow area. We don't typically do investments in the green, but I'll get back to that. And the red clearly speaks for itself. That's a stop. That means we do not believe we are in a risk posture that's acceptable for exploration at this time. So now when you start to look across the rows, you're going to see triangles, which represent deliverables. Those are milestones that we need to meet to start to change the risk posture to a more acceptable level. And across the top, where you see the years, you also see articulation of different exploration milestones of when the agency wants to either have vehicles flying or missions happening. And our milestones need to precede exceed those milestones and inform those milestones if we want to effectively mitigate the risk during the mission. From a cost benefit, it is much more beneficial if we can influence the design of the vehicle, the architecture of the mission, to mitigate the risk for the human rather than have to come in with something after that. It's always more costly to redesign, and if we have to carry more mass by having to bring something extra because it wasn't built into design, that's also challenging in a zero-sum budget game. And also on the schedule that's been laid out in front of us in terms of the agency objectives, we are definitely eager to move these risks from red to yellow to green. We would like to see them all be green by the time the Mars mission clearly is being planned, which is in the 2030s, be ahead of vehicle design. Why it's imperative that we think about what we can get out of low Earth orbit and lunar landing to know how to mitigate these risks confidently. There are opportunities at times to go from green to blue. You see one of them under in-flight medical conditions, and that's really about, again, optimization. At times, an optimization is about crew time, could be about mass, volume. From our perspective, we're looking at making the human more resilient, more robust, and also how do we understand recovery. In spaceflight, you can't accept no change. So trying to stop or reverse all change during a mission may not be appropriate because adaptation has its appropriate role. So our objective is to understand the impact of the adaptation, especially when you're asking someone to change environment quickly, going from microgravity to a partial G or a full 1G. That's when we have our biggest challenges with the human needing a recovery time period. So it's not inappropriate to allow change to occur and understand what recovery is required, but how can we get that recovery timeline into a place where it's congruent with a mission expectation? So again, I think the HRP website, the evidence reports go in depth on all of these risks. If you have more questions or would like to understand that in more depth, it also provides you all of the references associated with the prior work that informs the evidence report. Go to slide 9. A little bit about program constraints and goals. We have a lot of constraints. I think in the last chart I tried to articulate on schedule, crew access, the need for risk mitigation are really different than other agencies who might be soliciting research. And that goes back to trying to define what we mean by an applied research program. So ISS and analogs are limited resources, and you'll see actually in one of our topics today how we really encourage partnering and sharing. Because doing de novo research both can cost a lot of time if you're doing it in series, and also the resources in terms of the experimental model, the exposures are very high cost. So we do encourage partnering and sharing as much as possible. And oftentimes the proposals come in, we do the partnering on the back end, and that's not unheard of here. When we actually do research with the astronauts, the number and demographics of astronauts vary greatly. So often, in order to understand something like a sex difference, we're going to have to use a ground-based analog to tease that out, and then move into the astronaut core with respect to how would we probe that. The agency exploration architecture does influence our priorities, and when they change their architecture, we are responsive to that, and people have been subjected to that rapid change. I think we are on the next couple of years a very steady push forward clearly on lunar and Mars 2024. So I think we've got stability for this minute, but there are certain cycles that we have to admit there will be fluctuation. But we are a program dedicated for Mars exploration, so we're always in the back of our heads, how do we stay that course with still being responsive to some more immediate changes the agency may make. And our focus is on the human system risk reduction. So going back to deliverables and their application, even if you're doing something early stage to to have connected the dots to, in the end, how that may influence the application of your knowledge, and how that knowledge would affect the risk is really a fundamental thing we need to understand. And that is, when we do our relevancy review, what we're really trying to pull out of the proposal. Go to the next slide. Now, due to a lot of our constraints and also our need for evaluating the scientific method that's been proposed, we have put significant weight on the statistical considerations. Most of our constraints that drive this are about limited N number. Small N studies require a very strong statistical approach so that we understand whether we're getting a true negative or a true positive. And I just want to reiterate that real zeros, negative data, is as valuable to us as positive findings. Yeah, ruling something out is incredibly valuable to us. And so there is not anything wrong with negative results for us. We understand in terms of the publishing world that is still a barrier at times, but the output from a grant that results in a negative finding and we ruled something out is incredibly valuable. Again, as feeding into our decision making, that would help us understand whether we're on the right course or not, and how do we adjust. So as part of the peer review, we do have a statistician who weighs in on the statistical design, and we encourage everyone to partner with a statistician in the prospective design of your experiment. Go to the next slide, please. A little overview of the solicitation process. We do have a two-step process. So step one proposals are submitted to NASA and should include a synopsis of the intended research. We have a one-page limit for the step one proposals, and we're really trying to cut down on the length of what people write. For this 2019 HERO Appendices A and B, the step one proposal, your one page is due on the 5th of September by 5 p.m. Eastern. So we do list the details, the specifications of the step one proposals, and only those who submit a step one will be invited to step two. And the step two proposal opens on the 11th of September for Appendix A and the 30th of September for Appendix B. So that just means if you're thinking about writing a proposal, you must send us a step one. If you don't do a step one, you can't jump in on step two. That's what we're trying to communicate. The step two proposals are due on the 2nd of December, again by 5 p.m. Eastern. We have changed the page limit, so we want people to really pay attention to this. We have reduced them to 10 pages for Appendix A and 5 pages for Appendix B. The step two proposals will be reviewed for merit and programmatic relevance, which I actually mentioned on the last slide. So the merit peer review will be conducted by a panel of scientific and technical subject matter experts. NASA is at arm's length from this process. And then NASA will evaluate the programmatic balance, feasibility, and cost of the proposal. Those pieces of information are taken together to overall decide the best selections for NASA's objectives, the Human Research Program's objectives, and the final award decisions will be announced by April of 2020. We try to keep it to a 9 to 10 month process. Go to the next slide. Now the beginning of the meat of why you called. The Appendix A flagship. So these two topics are effects of G levels between 0 and 1 induced by parabolic flights on human neurovestibular and sensory motor systems. Second topic is base radiobiology tissue sharing. Research proposing the use of archived tissue samples or samples from ongoing experiments. The Appendix B omnibus. So these are the shorter, the 5-page limit, Appendix B. These are short-term investigations or technology development projects that provide innovative approaches to any of the risks. So it is not The first two topics you'll see are very specific about the content we're interested in understanding using those methods or platforms, whereas Appendix B Omnibus is open to all of those risks that you saw on the integrated path to risk reduction. The approaches can address anything associated with the knowledge gaps contained, again, in the IRP. That's also the area where if someone is a new investigator to NASA, is a really good opportunity, and we call those basic investigation opportunities for investigators new to NASA. So that's the top level. I think now is a good time to open up the discussion for those of you who have read the topics or who are interested in applying to either the appendices. We will do our best to keep up with the chat and answer questions. The question is, are you interested in mental health and psychological effects of long-term space missions? Yes, we are. I think you'll find that in the risks. It is not the subject directly of either of the topics that we have proposed. I will say, and I might ask our acting space radiation element scientists and also our human factors behavioral performance scientists to weigh in, because there are potential ways on the tissue sharing to look at outcomes relevant to that in an animal model.
Hi, yes, this is Steve Platts from Space Radiation. In our call, looking at tissue sharing, if there are tissues of interest, either from archive tissues or from a prospective study, then and they involve, the brain or some other tissue of interest for that, then that would be something that we could consider. Unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to add any kind of behavioral aspect to someone else's study in order to get that done. All that would be available is tissue, either frozen back or a fresh tissue from an ongoing study from a radiation standpoint.
So will step 1 proposals be reviewed, evaluated, or will all be invited to step 2? For Appendix A, the flagship, all step 1s will be invited for step 2. So the main objective is to get your step 1 in. We will be reviewing the Omnibus Appendix D, and you will be invited for a step 2. So the rules are different depending on the appendices. Appendix A, all step 1s we will allow a step 2. Omnibus, we will give you feedback on whether you'll be invited for step 2. Will there be other appendices that will be released, or are these the only 2 for this year's HERO solicitation? So we release 3 new topics a year. So July is considered our flagship. That's our cycle. So you will see appendix something like A and B. In November, you will see different topics. And in March, you will see another set of topics. So this is not the only topics for the year. It just happens to be the only topics open at this time. The presentation will be shared via the NSPIRES website, so the question is about sharing it. The link was in the slides, but I think will be on the, if you got to the NSPIRES website, will be on there. I realize that the time frame for awarding proposals is around 10 months. Are there any shorter time frames for grants? No, but not for the award period, because we give you time to write, and we have to have peer review, and NASA has to have its relevancy review, and then right after that, we make the selection. We have decreased the amount of time from 12 months or more down to 9 to 10 months. The grant awards have the statements of how long we're awarding for in each one of them, maybe whether they be 2 years or 1 year. That is in the details of each topic. Can solutions provided later be used to develop tests provided that NASA is given a license for use? We have had products result in patents.
We encourage commercialization of technologies. Yes, we do require that if a patent is granted, we're informed of that.
Yeah, and we do have a licensing office we work with when you get to that stage to understand exactly how that would work, and if NASA would be licensing back the technology. So that's great. For A, topic 1, parabolic slate, costs covered by HERO or these need to be written into the proposal. No, the platform costs will be covered by HRP, so those should not be written about in your proposal. Those costs.
The only thing I would add is if you're paying for your staff to travel to NBHAP, that those costs should be, the travel expenses should be written in, but not the actual research component.
Yeah, the parabolic slate will be in Europe, and those details are in the topic. So again, and we are trying to keep travel to a minimum in terms of there's limited space. There's limited space on the plane for all the researchers and all their associates. So we're trying to minimize travel costs in terms of just the absolute travel costs and the amount of support necessary to implement the experiment on the plane itself. What are the rules for non-U.S. researchers to participate? Okay. So non-U.S. researchers are allowed to submit proposals to the Bureau and any other NASA solicitation. However, NASA will not pay for that, are not responsible for paying the researchers. They need to find a sponsoring agency with a sponsoring governmental agency that will support their research. So yes, they can participate, but they need to have a letter of support as a part of that from a sponsoring government agency in order for the proposal to go through. Thank you for that question. Okay, should we also include the experimental design statistical purchase in step 1? No, I think we give directions about the technical content we expect, and we realize it's limited amount, intentionally so. So that is more about how you're addressing the topic and being responsive to the topic, but not that level of detail. Our development of countermeasures during Appendix B expected to be tested in FedRAMP campaign or ISS 1 year. Does that come later? So for Omnibus, you're not dealing with a topic that could accommodate something like a countermeasure development. If you think about the time course of 1 year and 150K being work that's commensurate with that, if you're refining a countermeasure, the maturation process would be a follow-on activity. So something like a FedRAMP campaign or ISS 1 year would not come under the Omnibus implementation. You elaborate on the parabolic flight opportunity, number of subjects that can be flown, number of parabolas per level.
So in general, previous flight campaigns that we've seen in Europe included 3 flights, 3 days with 1 flight per day. Each flight generally had 40 parabolas, 10 at each level. So we're talking about 0G, 0.25G, 0.5, 0.75, and straight and level flight for 1G. As far as number of subjects, what we've seen is probably around 9 or 10 per campaign, per study. That takes into account more than 1 subject per flight. So you can have 3 or 4 maybe on the airplane, and divide the parabolas so that either you're testing them concurrently with multiple providers doing the testing, or doing them sequentially and allotting 2, 3 parabolas per subject. We are limited in the amount of space that we can accommodate for both investigators on the flight as well as subjects.
And I'll add one more thing, and the final details of that will be decided once the proposals are selected, the final proposals are selected, and we negotiate those with our European colleagues as well. So the next question is, what are the max budgets per proposal for the flagship? So for Appendix A, parabolic flight is $400K per year, and the space radiation is $200K per year. Oh, over 2 years. So total 400.
Total 400. So that's 200 per year.
For 2 years.
For 2 years.
Okay. It's the same, both preparation, the actual flight, and then data analysis.
And for space radiation, it's 200 total. And if you want to do 100 the first year and 100 the second year, or
depending on the
125.
availability of the collaboration or where the tissue's coming from. Okay. So those are total values. 400 for the parabolic plate and 200 for the space radiation. As I mentioned before, the omnibus is 1 year, 150K. You recommend a good place to find prior research funded through this grant. Well, for these topics, again, the evidence reports are the best place to understand the prior art from a high-level overview.
The task book is the best place for prior research.
Okay.
And that link is provided in the solicitation.
Okay. And task book will actually contain final reports or links to publications that resulted from the work that's captured there. For Appendix B, I see that HRP anticipates awarding a small number of new investigator grants. Is this accurate? How many are expected? Again, it depends on the peer review scoring, and the number that are submitted, the peer review scoring, and the relevance. But that is a place we think that is a great opportunity for new investigators for NASA. So we don't, while our objective is to find 2 to 4, it really depends on who submits what. How important is it for proposals submitted to Appendix B to be innovative? There's always a double-edged sword. It depends on what risk you're going after and what you're trying to understand using your grant. It is a space where we have more latitude to take more risk because it is only 1 year, 150K. It is not, we don't have a prospective weight for the value of innovation. It's really about what you're doing and how it applies to risk reduction. Kind of like if it's innovative, and by that I think, oftentimes you're like, well, what does that mean? Is that code for if you can bring something in and use less crew time and be lower mass, a totally disruptive way of doing something that will have greater benefits than the cost of doing the miniaturization or whatever it happens to be. It's on a balance. So, but for us, the relevancy really comes into how are you going to impact the risk? What's the potential to buy risk down? The next one, with respect to Appendix A, Topic 1, well, the cost of the parabolic flight, yes, so I think we went over that in terms of NASA bears the cost of the parabolic flight. You're projecting what your science will cost and managing your team. Next one, in the HRP integrated path to risk reduction, the celestial dust exposure risk is listed as L by C TBD and labeled as insufficient data. Could studies based on Mars analog dust be considered appropriate for submission to Appendix B, OMNIBUS? In terms of scope of the risk, it has potential. I don't have a subject matter expert here right now, so we can get back to you with a more detailed answer on the Mars dust question. Does the same apply for space radiation labs? Is beam time covered by HRP? Yes. So we cover the cost of the exposure. Since you're partnering with someone that's already been addressed in the grant where the actual animals reside and the exposure is determined.
Yeah, please remember that our solicitation is for tissue sharing only.
Will partnering with NASA prior to proposal submission be considered more favorable than
Otherwise.
It depends on what work you need and what expertise you need to bring to bear. It is not a requirement. You don't weight it. It's just about how does that make if those are the experts that you need to collaborate with to develop a better proposal, I think that's the objective. Are you interested in radiation mitigating technology, materials, or just radiation damage characterization at this time? Since this is an active exposure, I'll let...
Well, again, since this is only a tissue sharing, where you would be getting either archived tissues that have been frozen or tissues from someone else's experiment, I'm not quite sure how you could accomplish radiation mitigating technology. That's not to say no, because you could come up with something so innovative and interesting that it could be worked, but just thinking about it off the top of my head, I don't see how you could make that work with the constraints of this particular call.
The only other place it could fit is something like an omnibus.
Right.
But
right.
Again, a radiation mitigating technology done in 1 year for $150K, we'd be very interested in seeing that proposal.
Yeah.
but yeah, it doesn't fit with Appendix A, Topic 2, but you might have some latitude in the omnibus for pursuing at least preliminary data.
Especially if it were a new investigator and they fit into that category where it could potentially be.
For Appendix B, omnibus has funding for 1 year only. I'm wondering whether funds, something jumped. Wondering whether funds and time would be available for one set of mouse reads with the analysis material for proposed CBD biomarker study, and would this be acceptable? Well, a lot of detail. Generally, omnibus does not fit well into anything that would require animals and radiation exposure. The animal cost alone could exceed what an omnibus can accommodate.
And the beam time is spoken for
Well ahead.
many months in
Yeah.
advance.
So it's hard to manage you in the year you get awarded into the queue for the exposure. Yeah, we can take a sidebar for after we conferred, I think that would be very challenging to accommodate with an omnibus. Not impossible, but very challenging. Does Appendix B omnibus support solicitation developing nutritional countermeasures against? Yes, because again, it's not risk constrained. So any of the risks you saw on the IPRR are potentially relevant. By sponsoring agency for non-U.S. research participants, you are referring to a government agency as sponsoring agency, not a foreign government. Okay. So if you are a non-U.S. If you are a non-U.S. researcher at not a U.S. institution, you need to have a letter of support from the foreign government who will fund your science.
In other words, if you're a German, then a letter from the LR will be required.
Yeah. If you are a non-U.S. researcher at a U.S. institution, then NASA can fund it because NASA actually funds the institution, not the PI directly. So I think that's a worthwhile clarification. So a non-U.S. researcher at a U.S. institution would run the nominal route and be eligible for NASA funding. A non-U.S. researcher at a foreign institution needs to use the appropriate foreign government letter of support because we cannot fund foreign institutions. And that's probably a distinction we don't make frequently enough, that we fund the institution you're at, not you, the PI, interestingly enough. It's a nuance, but it's true. So, can a PI submit more than one application? Yes. We do not limit the number of applications received. Does the budget limit change for new investigation Appendix B proposals given the one-year extension?
So the 1 year, when you apply for Appendix B, whether the regular omnibus or the B, it's still just for 1 year. And an extension may be granted after the fact, but otherwise you should budget $150K in your proposal.
For Appendix B, radiation mitigation technology. I think we mentioned that Appendix B, omnibus, 1 year, $150K. You could submit a proposal on that topic as long as it fits within the time and budget constraints. Okay, got that. Sorry. Understand that it depends, but is there a rough estimated for the number of awards for Appendix B applied investigation? No, none of the numbers are fixed. Our goal, I think we have been historically at about a 20% selection rate, which is good, but the absolute number of proposals we can fund is limited. And we propose the use of terrestrial test beds over that, other than human exploration research analysis. Yes, you can identify and help us understand the relevancy of a different terrestrial test bed in your proposal. When do you expect a call for antibacterial and anti-biofilm remedies? It is not currently part of the solicitation, and I am not going to discuss our two other solicitations this year. I think for those, you might actually want to look at space biology, opportunities for bio, that is also through Inspires. Can we use proton radiation for our experiments? We have to use DNL or Colorado in our experiments. Okay, so for Appendix A, Topic 2, we are not supporting active exposures in the proposals. It's about tissue sharing, and we have resources where you can find out prior radiation, tissues that were prior irradiated. We have also a forum where you can engage with actively funded investigators, so you can prospectively plan with that investigator a sharing opportunity. If you're talking about using omnibus, there's no constraint there. So depending on what you're proposing, you could you could use any of the resources you think are appropriate for your model. Then there's a question about parabolic flight, why they are not tuned specifically to 0.16, 0.3.
So, if you look at the required deliverables, in the text of the solicitation, we're looking for a dose-response relationship, and in order to build that curve, we think it's better to test at these levels. Also, we're looking for, is there a G threshold where the neurovestibular and sensory motor systems respond? So for those two reasons, we chose to do these levels and not lunar and Martian.
Our partnership, this medical consultation, allowed for Appendix B proposals to work with human analogs, associated neuroocular. Yeah, that's the space-associated neuroocular syndrome as a risk is perfectly within the bailiwick of Omnibus, and how you collaborate creatively for your proposal is up to you. There's no constraints on that. Is the use of parabolic flight permitted with Omnibus? Currently, it's the Omnibus, again, for 1 year, 150K. It would not align. It would not allow you the flexibility to map to when a parabolic flight comes up, even if that cost were within your profile. The time constraint is not really appropriate. It's not a good match. Glad to answer your question. Just had one meeting with all of them. We realize people are typing, so we're definitely give you the full 3 additional minutes. Do you have additional funding for your project to what is provided by Omnibus from another organization? Yeah, I think that's a creative way to augment a project that you already have funding and create better value. So we do not have a constraint on using Omnibus to augment an existing research project you have. Are there any limitations on how much of the award is spent on hardware development? We do not have a limitation on that. I think, on balance, what we're going to look at in terms of what your proposal states and how you use your budget to accomplish the deliverable. So as long as that's a good match, that's completely acceptable and would make sense. Any indication that the November solicitation might be a little higher budget? So the budgets are commensurate to the topic and what the topic really needs. And if you can actually look historically at other topics we've run to understand what we think really matches well. So again, we do not have the topic prepared for November or March at this time because we actually need that kind of agility to be responsive to the data that flows in and our strategic plans. So those will be in development soon. And then the funding will match the need. So there is no way to predict that those topics will drive a higher budget. It's again about matching the topic to budget. If awards are selected in April, which is our goal, and we so far have been meeting our goal regularly, when do you expect the period of performance to start? And I'm going to have to look at the elements because that work falls to them.
August, September, try to kick it off beginning of the school year, for sure. So usually August is when we try.
Okay, so yes, logistically, I think what happens is immediately after the April selection, our folks reach out and start with a telecon, and then it's about the logistics of working with the institution and the PI and the funding to get moved over, so it's realistic to expect a performance start date August or September, August to September 2020 is when the official start date would occur. If you're granted omnibus funding, can you apply for other HERO solicitations to extend the, yes. Yeah, actually, I think the omnibus is a good tool to get pilot data and preliminary data to prepare yourself for what we call a flagship, what would be what you're seeing, the larger appendices topics. So we really appreciate the questions. We're glad you've appreciated the answers. We do have one that we have to get back to, and it will be on the frequently asked questions page. As we mentioned, these will become public for people in particular who couldn't attend to look back at what has been asked and answered. We continue this process, via email and other mechanisms if you continue to have questions throughout the open period. So we appreciate your attention today and your attendance, and I hope you have a great weekend. Ben Goodman has just posted the URL link both to the HERO and I'm sure to this presentation, so you can get access to all the information we discussed here today. And the task book, which is the previous details of previous